Nightfall in Dresden by Parlour. When the sun rose on the rolling grey hills, the men began to stir about their makeshift campsite. Their black sweeping uniforms were murky with dried blood from the night before, and they had slept that evening with celebratory dreams of victory. Their goal had been simple: locate the source of the Jewish insurgency and eliminate them. When the sun rose that morning, all who stood in the way had been eliminated.
"Herr Becker," one of the young men asked, "should we bring their bodies to the town square? To set an example."
General Becker sneered at the still, crumbling structure that had been a hotbed of rebellion only the night before. He brushed soot off his armband absent-mindedly.
"Nein, Fritz," he finally answered. "We leave them where they fell. The smell of their putrid rot will be enough of an example. Now pack up, all of you. We are to return to Dresden by night."
The men saluted, raising their hands out to the sky quickly before setting to work. There was one truck between them all. General Becker himself and 5 of his most trusted guardsmen. Their mission, as stated, was to sever the heads of the insurgency that had begun to sprout across Germany. The Jewish population was fighting back, and they were hitting hard. Becker and his men hit even harder.
"Is that everything?"
Becker asked as the men began to pull a dark green tarp over the back of the truck.
"Yes, sir,"
young Fritz responded.
"We are all set to leave for Dresden."
Becker nodded, pulling open a passenger door and sliding into the truck. Their cargo securely packaged into the back of the truck, the men all accounted for, the group began their journey home to pick up new orders. Unbeknownst to the group, who had all packed in such a hurried fervor, they had left something behind at that tiny campsite. There, tucked behind the large stone that served as a backbone of the campsite, was a body. It was wrapped from head to toe in cloth, and its arms were placed in an X formation across its chest, as if it were a mummy. The body was chained across its legs and arms, keeping it firmly in position. The wind howled as it lay there, chained and bound like a wild animal. It lay there as the early morning sun began to climb even higher, and it lay there as the sun began to set beneath the hills. It was nearly nightfall when the car arrived. It had been driving along innocently enough, following the same route that Becker and his men took back home. Like Becker's group, the truck stopped at the campsite, the ashes of the insurgency building not a quarter-mile away. A man emerged from the driver's seat of the car. He was old and greying, with wide-rimmed glasses that sat on his nose and a cane that aided his movement. He was quickly joined by a young woman who emerged from the passenger seat, her brown, curly hair blowing in the autumn wind.
"Mein Gott,"
the man whispered to himself as he signed the cross in front of his chest.
"There was nothing we can do."
"Herr Schmidt, what happened here?"
the woman asked as she stepped closer to the scene of the crime.
"This place housed the chapter of the resistance,"
Schmidt said as he lowered his head.
"I can only imagine what horrors those monsters subjected them to. I suppose all we can do is—"
Schmidt turned to his left, his attention diverted. He saw the body that had been left behind, slumped against a rock like a sleeping soldier.
"Frau Engels,"
he motioned towards the body.
"Help me put this one in the back. They must have left this poor fellow to suffocate in there. We'll store him in the morgue until we can identify him and his next of kin."
Engels nodded, hoisted the body up and cradled it like a child. Schmidt hobbled back towards the car, pulling the backseat door open as she gently placed it across the seat. She seatbelted it in place horizontally with both buckles, and the pair resumed their drive towards Dresden Hospital.
"Well?"
The men waited in anticipation as Becker exited the command building stationed in Dresden. He had entered with the purpose of discovering their next objective in the war on the rebellion. And now he had an answer.
"Gentlemen,"
Becker announced to his men as they crowded around the building's steps,
"our next stop is simple. Intel has located another insurgency outpost just north of the city, about 10 or so miles out. They expect us to have it cleaned up by tomorrow morning." "It'll be dark soon, Herr Becker,"
one of the men boasted.
"I know you wouldn't stand a chance against a—"
He patted the back of the truck, which had since been emptied of cargo. The soldier nervously patted the back of the truck again, Then, once more, as the men's faces changed from courageous to nervous.
Where is it?
Becker whispered as the men's faces began to grow pale.
Where is it? I don't know.
The soldier stammered.
It should have been kept away after we put the cargo. We must have forgot it at the campsite. You forgot it? You have any idea what you've done?
He grabbed the soldier by the collar, shoving him away from the truck. He leaned his head against the back of the truck, mumbling swears to himself as he clenched his fists.
Here,
he said through gritted teeth,
is what we do. Our best bet, our only bet, is that those do-gooder doctors have brought it to the hospital. That's not far from here. We mobilize, taking all of our precautionary countermeasures. Our mistakes could cost dozens, if not hundreds of lives. We need to be careful in reclaiming it. Or, if unavoidable, killing it.
Johannes! Schmidt shouted as he swung open the hospital doors.
Give Frau Engels a hand with the cadaver. Prep it for examination and autopsy. Yes, Dr. Schmidt,
Johannes exclaimed as he rose to his feet. The young orderly quickly took the body from Engels' arms and rushed it towards the examination room, its chains rattling and clanking as it jostled in his arms.
What do you make of it, Herr Schmidt?
Engels asked as she closed the doors behind him.
It's most peculiar that they let this one suffocate whilst the others died in the actual raid. Perhaps this one is some kind of leader. Someone they wanted to suffer longer than the rest. I don't know,
Engels responded.
I'm not sure I want to know what drives this cruelty.
They think they are protecting the fatherland, Schmidt answered simply. They're so blinded by fascism that they can't see the country's rot stems from them. But it's no matter.
I'm a doctor, not a politician. My job is not to make the Führer's decisions for him, but to clean up after his actions. This man is just one more victim of a better Germany.
Engels nodded as the two moved further into the hospital. Several rooms down the hall, Johannes pushed open the door to the examination room, placing the body on a table in the center of the room.
First things first,
he said to himself.
Let's get all the cloth out of the way for Dr. Schmidt.
He cleanly cut a slit in the fabric with a nearby scalpel, ripping the cloth apart as he struggled to reveal the face. When he saw it, he gagged in disgust.
My God! What did they do to your friend?
As he stared at the disfigured body, he noticed something draped around its neck. He pulled it up and out of its cloth covering. It was a crucifix necklace. It was a simple design, just a small silver cross attached to the black string.
This might be useful to the police,
Johannes thought out loud.
Perhaps they can identify the man who worn something like that.
Johannes turned around and the body was gone.
Frau Engels,
Dr. Schmidt called as he pulled on his white coat.
Will you check on Johannes for me? He spent quite the time in the examination room. Yes, Herr Schmidt. I'll see to it right away.
She calmly entered the examination room, silence falling on the hospital for the first time in what felt like years. A scream of terror pierced the silence, echoing through the empty halls like a banshee's wail. When Becker and his men arrived at the hospital, they nearly slammed into Dr. Schmidt and Frau Engels, who were huddled by the entrance door.
Who are you?
Dr. Schmidt asked.
We sent for the
Where did you see it last? Becker asked immediately, prompting Engels to weakly point to the examination room. He gestured for his men to follow as they hurriedly marched down the hospital hall. When they got to the examination room, they were hit by a momentary relief as they saw the familiar shape of a body covered in cloth. The feeling faded fast, however, as Becker pulled the sheet off to reveal the withered husk of what had once been Johannes. His skin was wrinkled and leathery, and his eyes appeared hollow and colorless. His mouth had been contorted into a permanent, lifeless scream.
Shit,
Becker whispered.
It's gotten free. Everybody fan out! This is a hospital, so it's going to track the weakest patients first. Concentrate your searches on the populated rooms. Now move!
The men saluted quickly and scrambled out of the examination room. They tore down the hall, shoving into various rooms as Becker drew his pistol. He approached Schmidt and Engels, who were still huddled together in fear.
Where do you keep your patients?
He asked quietly.
Why do you need to know?
Schmidt asked in a shaky voice.
It wants easy prey, Becker answered. And I can't think of easier prey than bedridden sick men. Now for your safety and theirs, where do you keep your patients?
They're all on this floor. We're a small hospital. I couldn't afford to build any extra floor.
Schmidt's explanation was cut off by a scream of one of Becker's men. His attention diverted, he quickly rushed down the hall where the rest of his men had gathered. "What's happening?" he asked as he pushed through the men. When he entered the hospital room, he realized exactly what was happening. The patient in the room was already dead. Their body was shriveled and dry like Johannes, its signature mark. Becker, however, was more concerned with the pair of uniformed legs that dangled limply from the ceiling. Not only had they caught it mid-feeding. It dropped the body, screeching as it scrambled to the floor. It lifted the soldier's lifeless body in its grasp and stood straight up, giving all the men a good look and a clear shot at it. The creature was tall, but not unnaturally so. It looked like it was around 6'3". Its face had long since rotted away, leaving a skull that was crimson with splattered blood. Its hands were larger than normal, sporting long, spindly claws. It wore a uniform similar to that of the soldiers, its sweeping overcoat resembling that of Becker himself. Of course, that's not what the men were focused on. Their attention had been drawn by the long, pointed fangs protruding from the mouth of the skull. It leapt forward in an instant, throwing Becker aside as it tore the throat of Fritz, the group's youngest member. In an instant, Fritz's body began to dry up as the other men pumped bullets into the creature fruitlessly. It battered them all away like toys, its attention focused on Fritz's bloodless corpse.
"Herr Becker!"
one of the soldiers screamed.
"It's drank the blood of 3 men! With sunrise so far away, it's too powerful to contain!"
Becker gritted his teeth and gazed down at the satchel he brought with him. His options had been depleted.
Right, he mumbled to himself. The men come first. I must protect them at all costs.
He opened his satchel, removing the long pointed stake and gripping it tight in his hand. He slowly approached the creature, which was hunched over Fritz as the other men stayed along the corners of the room. When he was right behind it, it took notice. It whirled around right as Becker plunged the stake forward, driving it straight through the creature's heart. It screeched in pain, dropping the body of Fritz as it began to sink to the floor. It looked up at Becker, then around at the men. Then it dropped backwards, pushing the stake all the way through its chest. The men gathered around it, watching it take its last gasps as the life faded from its rotting body. When word reached the public about the incident at Dresden Hospital, it was told that the hospital itself was a secret insurgency base. This was the reason for the fire started by General Becker and his men, which encompassed the whole building, killing all the hospital occupants. Becker received a demotion for his reckless killing of German patients, and his men were scattered to different battalions. Fritz's family buried an empty coffin. There was something found that couldn't be easily explained away, however. Amid the rubble was a corpse that, according to the autopsy, had been untouched by the fire, but had been killed from a stake through the heart. The skeletal corpse, dressed in formal Nazi attire, was accounted for among Becker's group. The body's life and death were a mystery to those who investigated. One final thing. The body was transferred to a hospital in Munich, where it would properly be examined and further autopsied. When the doctor removed the stake from its heart, the body supposedly vanished.